You guys know what separation of church and state is? That is where the government has decided that church needs to be separate from the state. And, you know, like it or not, I think just on a legal basis, it's probably pretty good. But here's the really weird thing. Did you know that a nonprofit organization, such as a church that has a nonprofit status, is actually owned by the state? Think about that for a second. Read the fine paperwork in a 501c3 corporation, like what you get from the government. You just research it online. That doesn't sound like separation of church and state to me. When you start a 501c3 corporation, you want to start a church, and you want to be tax exempt, the government owns your church, man. That is not separation of church and state when the state owns the church.
Yes, we'll have representatives from 9 denominations who actually pastor somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 million people. And we're going to, first of all, equip them with the information they need to know about what they can say and what they cannot say in the church that would violate their 501c3 status with the IRS. In fact, we're going to have the IRS administrator there. We're going to have the Attorney General, Eric Holder, there. We're going to have the lawyers organization from around the country at ACLU, all giving ministers guidance on what they can and cannot do.
We sold out mighty cheap.
Not a church. They are a government corporation. The pastor is not a pastor. He is a corporate officer. Same with the deacons, the elders. They are viewed as corporate officers of the state. And I really believe, and this is kind of harsh for me to say, but I mean, I'm in the heart of this battle for so long, and I really believe what I'm about to tell you, Alex. I really believe that at the heart of the problem, our pastors and churches today are state worshipers.
They are.
I really believe that. They do not worship the King of the universe, the King of kings and Lord of lords. They pretend that they do. They sing songs, they have praise services, you know, they have worship services, they talk about Jesus, they preach the gospel, etc. But every time when push comes to shove and you got to make a decision, government is going to be the one that you side
That's
with.
right. Who you serve is who you obey. Who you serve is who you obey. Who you serve is who you obey.
The churches that are out there right now are 501c3s. The Internal Revenue Service is over here in their pocket. And the Internal Revenue Service is holding on to their back pocket, and they're saying, oh, you don't talk about sin. We're not interested in hearing you talk about sin. And you're not going to get involved in politics because we'll come take away your 501c3 if you get involved in politics. Well, a lot of these rules weren't established at the point in time they got in that 501c3, and they didn't realize they were going to lose all those rights, but they took themselves and placed themselves in subjection to them because they were told to by attorneys and CPAs in the church. Well, you're in a situation now where, as a church, you're in a position where you're scared to death to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you're scared to death to condemn sin. And the reason why you are is because if you condemn it, you're afraid they're going to come and take your stuff. Because they do have the authority to come take your stuff if you fall outside of the confines of the contract of the 501c3 rules and regulations. And now you're in a position as the church where you not only have that as a problem, but you're also sitting in a situation where if you all of a sudden make that decision to start talking about politics and to deal with sin the way you need to deal with sin, you're in a situation where they come in and say, you're no longer tax exempt. And because you're not tax exempt, we're going to declare all back taxes on you and your property. So we're going to go back now and you owe us $4 million for the back taxes that you have, and we're going to apply penalties and interest because you violated your 501c3. So they're in a situation where they can come take all their stuff because they violated their tax exemption status. And the worst part about it is attorneys have now taken and put churches in a position where they've not only done that, but they're pledging the people in the church as surety against the church. You're coming in and now you're a member of the church, You're a stockholder of that church, and if the church has a difficulty, they're going to come to you for that money. Not only that, but you're also in a situation where if you personally donated money to the church, and that money that you personally donated to the church, you wrote off on your income taxes, they declare that church to not be a proper tax exemption status. Now they're in a situation where they'll come back and say, that was disallowed, and because that was disallowed, you owe back taxes and penalties and interest on everything that you donated because it was a disallowed exemption. So the churches that are out there are sitting in a situation where the house was built on sand.
We sold out mighty cheap.
The title of it is Separation of Church and State, but the subtitle is God's Churches. And they are God's churches. Pastor, it's not your church, it's God's church.
That's right.
It's God's church. And is God's church a spiritual entity or is it a legal entity? That all depends on what you have done with it or what others in the past have done with it. I'm saying the majority, the very vast majority of churches today are no longer New Testament churches. They have become creatures of the state. They are now businesses or government entities. And when a church becomes a government entity, then that church ceases to have Christ as its head. In this contract, the two parties, if the state is the head of the two parties, then that makes the state the head over the church. And we know from Ephesians chapter 5, the Bible says that Christ is the head of the church.
Now they can't even teach marriage. They won't even criticize abortion because it might offend someone. Now they're taking the crosses out of churches all over America. I know you know about that initiative. I mean, this is it.
That this is a definition control scheme meant to control the churches. And it has worked, and it has worked. It is meant to redefine the church. It is meant to keep the church within the four walls and not go out and do its job.
So again, that 501c3 tax exempt status has been the tool that Lyndon Johnson first created back in the 1950s, that he knew what would happen. He knew it would neuter and control the pastors and churches. And that's exactly what it's done. And now when you get guys like Franklin Graham and Richard Land, who, by the way, is a member of the CFR, as you know, coming out saying that they support Barack Obama's gun control initiatives, especially the universal background check, you know, it shows the power that the government has over many of these evangelical leaders.
Some fear any nuclear, biological, or chemical attack on U.S. territory might trigger just that. And as KSLA News 12's Jeff Farrell discovered, the clergy would help the government with potentially their biggest problem, us.
From my cold, dead hand.
Charlton Heston's famous declaration captures a truly American value, the overarching desire to protect our freedoms. But gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil. If martial law were enacted here at home, like depicted in the movie The Siege, easing public fears and quelling dissent would be critical. And that's exactly what the Clergy Response Team, as it's called, helped accomplish in New Orleans.
Jeff, the primary thing that we say to anybody is let's cooperate and get this thing over with, and then we'll settle the differences once the crisis is over.
Such clergy response teams would walk a tightrope between the needs of the government versus the wishes of the public.
In a lot of cases, these clergy would already be known in the neighborhoods in which they're helping to defuse that situation.
For the clergy, one of the biggest tools that they will have in helping calm the public down or obey the law is the Bible itself, specifically Romans 13.
Because the government is established by the Lord, you know, and that's what we believe in the Christian faith. That's what's stated in the Scripture.
FEMA training to take guns and have pastors prepared for it. They're planning to come for the guns. This is like catching, you know, the Nazis, you know, infiltrating the White House or the Chi-Coms. I mean, this shows the authoritarian, creeping nature that they're waiting for these shootings.
As we know, the FEMA camps have been, the FEMA has been instructing pastors for many years. In schooling them in when the president declares a national emergency, asking the pastors to instruct the congregations to surrender their firearms. This has been going on for years.
But get into, Franklin Graham, your article, the Southern Baptist Convention coming out and saying get rid of the Second Amendment. I mean, this is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's imperative that Christians and non-Christians alike understand that this is a very, very serious attempt to dismantle the Second Amendment. And unfortunately, we have many evangelical leaders, such as Franklin Graham, Richard Land, and many others, who have taken the position that the state is always right and that you never resist, you never question the state. And if the state says that you are to register your guns, then you're supposed to register your guns. If a universal background check, then so be it.
And the non-for-profit division of the IRS that controls 750,000 churches in America, and their purpose of the meeting was to devise a plan classified as top secret called Operation D, and that to devise a plan to control all uncooperative churches in America. Incredible. To put together a plan. And they said that their plan was a five-pronged plan. It included the financial power of the IRS, international pressures using the treaty powers of the UN, the investigative and intelligence forces of the FBI, CIA, and NSA, the judicial and prosecutorial assets of the U.S. Justice Department and federal courts, and congressional legislations. Now, they used all five of these against our church to bring us down.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion and preventing the free exercise thereof. So 501c3 as applied to churches violates the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. 501c3 is a law. That had to be written by the Congress. Both houses had to approve it, sent to the president, had to be signed into law. For those rules, that's true. But the fifth rule may not violate fundamental public policy was added by the Internal Revenue Code, the Internal Revenue Service itself.
Or follow what God says, and so no one can then dispute that. And so we are the sovereigns here with only God above us, not the state above us, because whoever you put above you is God. And we've now made the state God, and it's now acting like God, and it's now saying it's God. And where do you want to start first? I mean, it's like the dam broke, the hedge is being lifted, evil is flooding in, and the preachers are all bought off.
Yeah, unfortunately, the 501c3 tax-exempt status has made slaves out of most pastors and churches. They fear the IRS. They fear the loss of their tax-exempt status. And so when they get into the pulpits, they are afraid to discuss anything that might be controversial. Plus, let's not forget this. There's a lot of people out there in the congregations that are very weak, very wishy-washy. They do not want to hear the hard issues. A lot of pastors are deathly afraid of offending their own congregations, and they're afraid of losing the tithes and offerings of people. They're afraid of the controversy that may erupt inside the congregation. That combination has completely neutered the pulpits of America. And you're right. The churches and the pastors of America are literally contributing to the decline of our liberties here in this country today. And I think this is very comparable to the Nazi Germany period of history, when there were some 14,000 evangelical churches in Germany at the time. And of the 14,000 evangelical churches in Nazi Germany, was becoming Nazi Germany, only 800 resisted Adolf Hitler. That's about 5%. Now think about it, Alex. If 25% had have resisted Hitler, if 50% had have resisted Hitler, the entire history of the world would have been changed. But because the pastor said and did nothing, Hitler was allowed to seize control of the government and then the country and enact all these totalitarian...
And 20 million, they were like 75 million. Germany, counting 2 million soldiers, lost 20 million people. Talk about a judgment. Talk about doing nothing. And it's the same story over and over. And authoritarians every time come after Christians. That's the point, is that you're never going to do enough for them.
Exactly my point. And that's what the preachers don't understand. They think that by remaining neutral and trying to maintain politically correct messages, etc., that they are somehow going to be spared any of this. They're in denial. Actually.
Well, it's also a cop-out. They go, we're trying to win souls. Yeah, we know the evil's taken over.
But the historical teaching of Christianity has never been to obey the government no matter what.
The whole Bible is about resisting tyrants and Pharaoh and everybody else. I mean, Absolutely. It's ridiculous. I mean, how do preachers with straight face say, well, go ahead and go along with abortion. The government wants it. We're the government.
And you ought to study who gets 501c3 tax exemption. There are witchcraft churches. The Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey, is a 501c3 corporation. So you could literally have the government stepping in and saying Christianity is now illegal and revoking the church property, which they own, the government owns, and giving it to the Church of Satan.
Do you know how many other state churches there are? There's Wiccan state churches, Satanist churches. They're all 501c. You don't want to be in that company. You want to come out from among them. 2 Corinthians 6:17. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord. This is the Lord saying this. And touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. When the church signs over its rights to go back into bondage to the state, it is a state corporation, and it is a state church. Do you understand that? And we have a church who voluntarily is going back to the Pharaoh, who voluntarily is going back to the bondage of the government. We're talking about the state churches. And I don't want us to put all 501c churches in one book. Because what happens is there's a lot of different churches that are 501c that preach the full unadulterated word of God. But soon that is coming to an end. Very, very soon. There's a lot of atheist groups out there that have a lot of money, and they're writing the government, and they're telling the government that it's unfair what these churches are getting away with. Why? Because when these churches sign over to the government, they do the following. They waive its right for freedom of speech. That's a fact. You cannot speak what you want to speak within the church. They now control what you can and what you cannot say.
To know about what they can say and what they cannot say in the church, about what they can say and what they cannot say in the church, about what they can say and what they cannot say in the church that would violate their 501c3 status with the IRS. And
the government has routinely meetings with churches. In this case, he was going to meet with the pastors of approximately 10 million members in the United States, equipping them with what they can and with what they cannot say. This is your government speaking. Your government is saying this. Something's wrong with that, don't you think? Is there not something wrong with that? I believe there's something wrong with that. You see, because when you become a 501c church, you become a corporation. And when you become a corporation, the one who is sovereign over you is no longer Christ. It's now the state, because you have to answer to the state for everything you say. And when you're trying to preach the truth, you have to tiptoe over what to say, what not to say, because if you say the wrong thing, you're running the risk of them taking away your status. Now, some brothers and sisters out there are on fire for the Lord, and they'll preach whatever, whenever, and they can take away whatever they want from them, and they don't care. And maybe that's you. But I'll be honest with you, at this point in time, my friend, we are living in a generation where God is asking of brothers, of sisters, of people, of God, to come out from among them. Scriptures tell us very clearly, come out from among them. How is it that the church in the United States of America, the church that for countless of years in the 40s, 50s, 60s, sent forth so many missionaries across the globe, revivals on every corner, tent churches here and there, but now it's filled with so much lukewarm entertainment within the church. The church no longer speaks on the issues that matter. The church is now quiet. The church is now strangled by the oppression of the 501c status.
But the real issue has now surfaced. The whole question is, who is Lord? Is it Caesar or is Christ Lord? And that is going to have to be settled in the United States. And that is the real question at issue now. Who is Lord?